one of the great skills in the sort of old film days at a World Cup match was to be the first person to turn your hairdryer on to dry the film, because if you didn't, invariably the power got knocked out. The power surge of 35 hairdryers in a wire room would be catastrophic for the electricity network in a stadium. Back then, that process for one image could take 40 minutes for one image. Today, we're moving images in between, 15 and 20 seconds from the camera to a customer are the key moments.
Hello and welcome to Outlines, a podcast about sport, stories and the media. My name's Eoin Connolly, hope you're well. It is great to have you listening. We're going to start with a little mental exercise. I want you to close your eyes and think of the FIFA World Cup. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Might be the trophy if you're not that imaginative. It might be a great goal or a flashpoint or a personal memory. If you're lucky, that might even be from inside a World Cup stadium. But I reckon there's a decent possibility it's a single still image, something that captures the emotion and the colour and the drama of football's greatest moments. And if it is, then there's a fair chance it got to you through the lens of a Getty Images photographer. Our guest this time is Ken Mainardis, the global head of editorial for Getty Images. He sets the storytelling direction at the world-leading photographic agency, maintaining its standards of quality and credibility and overseeing the extraordinary processes by which its pictures move from the camera to its editors and onto the photo desks of publishers across the globe. We spoke about how all of that operates, particularly around a major event like the World Cup, where Getty works not only with its media clients, but with FIFA itself. And Ken lays out the specific challenges and opportunities of the tournament, the distinctive angles Getty seeks out, and why the World Cup, not least the one going on right now in Mexico, Canada and the US, reliably produces such compelling imagery. We also discussed the role of the photograph in modern sports media more generally, how technology has changed the craft of taking and editing shots, the creative and commercial influence of the smartphone and social media, resurgent trends in analog film, and Getty's stance on AI. Some truly fascinating stuff on a core element of sports storytelling. That's to come. As always, if you're enjoying the podcast, then do subscribe, rate and review on your platform of choice, like and share what you see on socials, details for those accounts in the show notes. I really appreciate any support in spreading the word. And if you like to get involved, get in touch. Okay, enough of that. We're here to talk about the power of sports photography and the World Cup and all that. Here is Ken Mainardis. So you're in Sweden. Whereabouts in Sweden are you?
So I'm just north of Gothenburg. Okay. Very, very beautiful part of the country. Very nice.
Yeah, lovely. And lovely this time of year as well, I'm sure. But maybe it's quite hard to judge like what the response now in the current World Cup format is going to be. But traumatized by the result the other night? Or is it kind of like, well, we're kind of probably in the next round?
I'm very fortunate. My allegiances are completely smashed all over the place. So I was raised in the UK. So I would say culturally I'm British. Moved to Sweden, so I have a little bit of certainly my children will be upset. And then I had an Italian father, so I can't really pin any hopes on the Italians anymore. So I'm very nicely evenly spread.
Yeah, but what's the national response been to? Because you that's some real whiplash there from a 5-1 start to a 5-1 second game the other way. I'm not sure that's ever happened in a World Cup.
No, probably true. I think the Swedes had very low expectations coming into this tournament, given some of the results in the prior. So they're quite a humble bunch. So I think they were quite surprised by the first game. I think the second game was much more aligned to what they thought might happen.
Okay, what's the workflow like for you guys there? I suppose like it's Getty, you're going to be everywhere at the World Cup, but you are playing a role elsewhere, you know.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's It's one of our very biggest events. So we start the process of putting something like this together pretty much the moment the trophy gets lifted at the last one. We start thinking about this one. And so we have a very, very large team of north of 100 people who are both in the country in the various locations, but also with a hub in New York, which is our live editing center. And so they're watching the imagery come in, which always blows my mind. As somebody who's been around this industry now for over 30 years, when you now watch still imagery come in from the camera to our editing center, it comes in quicker than the TV pictures on the screen that you're watching, which is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah. And what's I suppose we'll do it this way round, given we've started talking about the World Cup, and kind of do some of the more nebulous questions a bit later. But like, what's the practical process then for Getty? Let's take it down to the level of a single World Cup game, because we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of some of your other plans.
Sure.
But for the 90 minutes plus hydration breaks of a game at this World Cup, what are you doing? How are you? What's the setup? You've got, you'll have photographers in the stadium, and at the other end you'll have companies like the BBC who want still images, and newspapers who want still images. As you've alluded to there, faster and faster and faster at each one of these events. So what happens in between?
So from a purely manpower perspective, we have photographers in every corner of every game at the field level. We have photographers who are positioned up in the tribunes, in the stands, who are covering as well. And that's all our editorial coverage. At the same time, in each venue, we have a team of photographers working as part of our FIFA partnership, who are creating content for FIFA. And all of these photographers are connected to a network, a communications network that we work with with both FIFA and the organizing committee to install at every venue. That is then taking every single frame shot from all of those cameras back to New York, where our editing team is sitting, and we have essentially a vast array of expert editors who are sitting in a production line, essentially, selecting images, treating images, so simple crops, simple color corrections, and then applying caption data. What that then does is, once those humans have touched all of that imagery, they obviously are culling it right down from the raw take to the finished product, which is then going out to, yes, exactly as you say, the BBCs of this world, the publishers of this world. What is, I sort of alluded to it just a few minutes ago, but what is kind of mind-boggling to me is that when I started, if you were to move an image from a World Cup match to those customers in the days of film, and I'm talking sort of early 90s and before that, you're talking about 40 minutes, right? And I remember in those days, you remember photographers sprinting back into wire rooms, developing film, getting the hair dryers out. One of the great skills in the sort of old film days at a World Cup match was to be the first person to turn your hair dryer on to dry the film, because if you didn't, invariably the power got knocked out. Right? The power surge of 35 hair dryers in a wire room would be catastrophic for the electricity network in a stadium. But of course today, back then, that process for one image could take 40 minutes for one image. Today, we're moving images in between, 15 and 20 seconds from the camera to a customer of the key moments. And it's not just the speed of an individual image, which is so kind of compelling to me. It's that, I remember being super impressed when we started to do an image in that speed, but now you get every angle in that speed. So when the ball hits the back of the net from an England goal, you're not just looking at one image or one version of that goal going around the world in 20 to 30 seconds. You're actually seeing it from behind the goal, from the other end, from above, from the remote cameras. So it's really, really a huge leap forward over the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's an extraordinary journey. What's the kind of volume of imagery we're talking about then for a single World Cup game? Bear in mind there's 104 at this tournament. So in one game, how many images are you seeing, and then how many images are the publishers seeing at their end?
So editors can be easily saying anything like 50 to 60,000 images during a game, and that is edited right down to no more than between 500 and 750, which I think shows you, for me, it always sort of underlines for me the importance of the editor, the expert editor who really, really understands imagery when you're taking that volume at that speed, right, down to something that is valuable to a customer.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. Like, what I think one of the things we can kind of get into is what a Getty image is, you know, what your kind of standards are, and the kind of storytelling role that you're playing in that. But let's just stick to the kind of the World Cup context just for another moment. What's different this time from Qatar and Russia? Because, you know, again, everyone's going to see this through a consumer lens, if you pardon the expression. Yep. And digital photography has changed a lot, but for most people, what's really changed is the smartphone, which again is another kind of influence we can get onto. But when you're talking about that volume of imagery and that volume of processing and that distributed to end, you know, the publisher end, the numbers of different ways they're going to want to tell stories and different outlets that they're going to want to tell stories to has all expanded considerably, even in the last kind of 3 or 4 years. So what's in that planning phase? What are some of the things you've been adopting, and what are some of the ways from that kind of technical standpoint that the challenge has changed?
So the challenge is sort of incremental across every tournament, in the sense that we're always looking to move the ball forward, you know, a certain amount as far as new angles, deploying our photographers' creativity in new ways. That is really, really important these days, in the sense that, I mean, in a way, the ultimate challenge we set our teams is that we're not blind to the fact that every minute of these games is broadcast live on live TV into our homes, into our iPads, often by 32 TV cameras positioned at every point in the venue. And so what we really set out to do with our team is to set the challenge to our directors of photography, to the editors, to the photographers. Can you show readers something that they haven't seen on the television? And that comes about by where they might be able to sit, and whereas, you know, the editorial positions at a World Cup game that we deploy our folks to, as well as our competitors, are all very standard through our partnership with FIFA now, which goes back to 2008. We're able to deploy photographers to parts of the venue that genuinely you don't see coverage from, or stills coverage from. And so we're able to, I think, bring insights to folks, whether it's from tunnels, whether it's from dressing rooms, whether it's from back of house areas of the venue, whether it's from spectator areas that general media don't get to, whether it's remotes that we install that are non-standard, whether it, you know, in roofs or in, I mean, there's for a long time there have been remotes in the back of goals, but we're now deploying remotes that basically you don't see as if you're shooting through the goal. It's as if you're in the goal. And all of that is creating a level of differentiation, I think, that makes the photography live at least together with the live video feed, because I think for photography to be relevant, it has to do something different to what you see on television.
Yeah, I mean, that leads us into, I suppose, the broader angle on this. Again, I think this is going to be completely unavoidable using some of these metaphors, but the role of photography in sports media in 2026, I mean, you know, we're somewhere where, as you say, we have more broadcast capacity than ever, and we also have more imagery than ever, but there's something about a curated image that still cuts through, I suppose. So what's the kind of the more company-wide approach that you take to your role in the sports media in this area?
I think if you're genuinely positioning yourself as creating differentiation, something that is different, as I just described, you have to really play into a couple of things. The first thing is that photography is largely, I think, whether we like it or not, the photography has become, or visuals certainly have become, the primary language we communicate with. And I think that's really interesting when you think about all the most important moments in your life. I certainly personally, maybe it's because I am so wedded to photography, but I don't think of them as video or moving images. I often think of them as still images. And so I think at a very base level, there's a psychological importance to the still image in when we come to major moments in our lives. And I think that's sort of the foundation of it all. I think then what we're trying to play into is in any sport, the act of the actual action. Let's take the World Cup. We're talking about the World Cup. Somebody kicking a football, no matter how well they do it, it's not actually that exciting in its absolute pure base moment in the kind of in isolation. If you take a step back from that and go one level deeper, and you have some other humans watching somebody kicking a football, that's also quite interesting. And even if that person's doing it really, really well, it's probably not the thing that's going to drive huge interest in what's just happened. What becomes the really key part of all of this is when you're able to turn the act of somebody doing something that's sporting, in this case playing football, have an audience watch that, but then interact with it and make it into a conversation and discourse. Mm-hmm. And so exactly through all of that, those kind of tactics I was just saying, to try and create differentiation, to try and create something you've not seen before. When you open a magazine, or whether you go online, you will ultimately get to a point where you say, oh, that surprised me, and I will go talk to somebody about that. I'll talk to somebody on the tube. I'll go and talk to somebody about that in the office. And that is where engagement starts. And I think that's the role photography can really play.
So let's take that down to the level of the individual photographer or the individual image. Like, what is there a parameter? Do you have a sense of what a Getty image is? You know, the kind of standards and so on, the expectations that you have.
Yeah, for sure. We see it almost as a DNA that sits in all of our coverage, really across three very distinct areas. Firstly, the absolute non-negotiable with everything that we do is that the photographer has to be of the quality that is able to get those decisive moments, balls hitting the back of the net, key moments in games, key moments that decide games. The second piece of it is to deploy a level of creativity that is superior, that is technically creative, but that is also creative from a journalistic perspective. And so those are really, really key. And the third piece, which is ever increasingly more important, is it has to be always accurate and trustworthy. In a world where we know that a lot of people don't necessarily trust everything they see that's visual, we invest a lot of time in making sure that we are, winning a battle for trust on a daily basis. Now then, to achieve those three things, for us, it is incredibly important that we deploy a team of specialist photographers. Unlike many of our counterparts, we don't just deploy specialists in sports, entertainment, news to editorial coverage, but in many instances, the photographers working for us at the World Cup are all soccer experts or football experts. That for us is it's relatively unique in the photography industry, but for us it's incredibly important because we think in just the same way as if you're reading an article about the foreign exchanges or conflict, and you want to be reading the sort of specialist insights of a writer who is knowledgeable about these things, that you do get a different level of insight from a photographer who is a specialist in their sport, whether that's football, whether that's motorsport, whether that's tennis, the list goes on and on and on. And so those first two elements, making sure that you're there and you're getting all those decisive moments, and then you're able to be the most creative eyes around the field, those things really sit on the shoulders, in our view, of specialists.
Yeah, and how are you achieving that at something like the World Cup, where you will have dozens, if not hundreds, of photographers in a venue at any one game? You're obviously spreading yourself very far and wide, geographically, in terms of where you're getting that talent from. Some people will have travelled from host nations, but lots of people will practically be in the local market providing that kind of coverage. So, how do you coordinate all of that and make sure that you are getting kind of the best talent when it comes to all that?
So we invest in a staff of just a little under 150 staff photographers who are based around the world, who are the very best football photographers in the world, we believe. And so rather than depending on local talent or talent that may be, 1 week is covering a conflict in the Middle East and the next week is covering the World Cup, we are deploying that team of football experts and we fly them in and we bring them in for the World Cup, and then we deploy them around the country.
Yeah. So you actually have that kind of staff capacity. Is that, I'm guessing that is for select events, basically, the World Cup being kind of top of the list.
It is, but that team is then, throughout the season, that team is covering the Premier League, the Bundesliga, La Liga. When it comes to football, there is plenty and plenty of football to cover through the season.
Yeah, sure. And what's are they bringing? Are people bringing their eye to this, and you're saying that meets our particular standards, or do you have an idea of the kind of photography that kind of bears your mark to begin with?
It's a little bit of both. It's things like, as I said, at the technical creative level, it's things like the cleanest backgrounds, images that are beautifully composed, and all of those elements. But you're absolutely right. Certain individual photographers, you can look at their work and you see their personality in the image. It's the image by a specific photographer based on just looking at the image, because they're in certain very special cases, their personality translates into that content, which is always really special.
Yeah. And when we're talking about something like a World Cup, we have the Azteca Stadium, albeit not by that name, in this competition. You have these extraordinary, and this is, I think there's an argument to be made on the broadcast side. This is the first World Cup that kind of has looked slightly different, maybe for 3 or 4 cycles, because of the facilities and where the camera positions and stuff can be established. And obviously venue plays a very specific role in telling that story, in telling that visual story. So what's the process that you go through in terms of understanding where, you have the football pitch, but then you have the framing around it of that venue? Is that something that you do through site visits? Is that something that you do, through the relationship with FIFA, basically?
Yeah, no. So as part of that, as the moment that they lift the trophy of the last one, we start working on the following one. There are sort of at least biannual, often more than that, site visits where our operations team and directors of photography are doing exactly what you're sort of hinting at, which is checking out where are the most original photo positions. So, what's available from gantries. Especially a lot of the incredible venues in the US have got really unique points of view, as it were, as far as being that very few of them are just sort of your standard bowl, and they have all sorts of unique opportunities to locate yourself. And so that creates very, very original angles. And those are sort of things that we would have been looking for. The other thing I would layer in beyond the venue that can make a massive difference is light.
Yeah.
Light is critical to still photography in a way that it's not critical to television coverage. And a summer tournament in Mexico, the United States, and Canada lends itself to absolutely fantastic light for photography.
Yeah.
In a way that some, for instance, European World Cups might not do that, especially in the evening.
Well, this is the thing as well, is that, 3 of the games are being played during the day, basically. Fairly typically, you might get some Eastern Seaboard games played a bit later in local time, but particularly any game in Los Angeles, it's going to be daylight, and it won't be what you get kind of either end of a European football season or a tournament in Europe, which is 8 o'clock, exactly 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock sunlight. You're getting blazing sun in the middle of the day.
And that's exactly it. Shadows are the enemy of television coverage. Especially very, very profound shadows, but they can be the friend of a stills photographer. You can make all sorts of art being able to use shadows and silhouettes, and so that definitely plays a part. If you think back to the 1970s, as somebody who was very young, I was too young for the 1970 World Cup, but if you think about the color photography from the Mexico World Cup in 1970, it's some of the most beautiful imagery of the World Cup because it's early color. Some of it is early color, and a lot of it is benefiting from this sensational light.
Yeah. Let's look at it as well. Obviously the photographers are bringing their creativity and all the rest of it to proceedings, but they're working incredibly fast. They're working in the moment, and they will not, the speed you're talking at, they won't have looked at any of their images until they've been published, probably. So what's the judgment that your editorial team then plays, and how has that shifted the quicker that loop has become from them to the kind of editorial desks at publishers?
So that expertise is really looking at a couple of key things. It's looking at for sort of key action, sort of your classic football action. It's looking for peak body expression. There's the human body at its absolute extreme, and that is absolutely what makes a fantastic football action picture. And so an editor might be sitting looking at 50 frames of a moment, but what they're really very, very quickly trying to isolate is that moment where both bodies are at absolute sort of extreme investment in the moment, as it were, from a physical perspective. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing, they're looking for that creativity as well. They're looking for the moments where things are unique and look slightly different. And then the third thing, which is absolutely the key, is to come back to that moment about making sure you've got all of these decisive moments, is they're deploying their brains as journalists. Their editors are making sure we are telling a story. It's just not a sequence of images. It's a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and the images do achieve that.
Yeah. There's a longer tail to something like the World Cup, and that is true both editorially and commercially. So, I mean, editorially, I worked with Getty Images when I was lucky enough to have access to your output when I was editor at Sports Pro, because that was a magazine primarily, and the kind of website that was a sports business website. So we weren't covering stuff as live, particularly not on the field. You had the luxury of being able to take a step back and say, well, now what's a really arresting or unusual or what have you image to kind of elevate everything that's around it. Is there a process like that internally where you're thinking, here's a shot that could really carry the stamp of this tournament going forward? And it wouldn't necessarily, one that I've just recalled now is President Macron kind of getting up on his chair at the 2018 final, and you have this kind of very dramatic image of him, obviously far away from the action, as you say, a distinctive privileged position to be in to get that shot. That sort of image, as well as just the sort of the photos that are carrying the story through the 90 minutes and the sort of 2-3 hours that go beyond that. Yeah. Is that something that you're conscious of in that process as well? The images that are going to tell the story in the much longer term, in the way that those photos from the 1970s you mentioned are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spend a lot of time sort of on a daily basis. Not once our editor's out with customers, we spend a lot of time curating that back down to sort of best of the day, essentially, so that we further constantly are curating around what might have that longer shelf life, that might that might be the defining images of the tournament. And we do that at the end of the tournament as well, because often this is the content that then becomes the preview content for future tournaments and for retrospectives at the end of this year. And yeah, no, absolutely. This is history in the making, and those are the key moments. Those are the key kind of the key images that will do that. I think it's also very closely related to the fact we're very lucky to and privileged, we feel, to be able to manage the world's largest privately held photography archive. And so this curation that is sort of the defining moment by day, by week, by tournament from something like a World Cup often speaks a very similar visual language to the images from 1970, 74, 78, 82. And there's this kind of nice, lovely sequence, the lovely sort of connection between them by the end, which I think is, the example I was talking about recently was, when you connect the sort of beautiful imagery of Diego Maradona in 82 and 86, and then you look at the sort of the Messi coverage in 2018, and I think we're about to get some more of it in 22 and now in 26, there's this lovely sort of thread that comes through the Argentine 10, right? Which is like a visual, almost like a visual language, which is playing out in front of us. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously a lot of that stuff is going to be, or a lot of what remains resonant is going to be dictated by results, right? So if one country wins or has an unexpected result, then that will be the image that kind of comes to define the tournament just because it becomes a part of the story. But through what you're saying, are you able, now that you've done a few of these, to see an image and think that one is worth keeping an eye on for posterity? Yeah.
One that jumps immediately to mind is from the final in 2022 when Messi was hoisted on the shoulder, having finally won the World Cup. He was hoisted on the shoulders of his teammates under the crossbar, I think. And this was kind of the image that in your mind, even before you see it, you think, if they finally do it and Messi finally lifts the World Cup, this is the image that will play in that thread, in that narrative thread, back to the Maradonas and those sort of iconic images. And so when it happened, you immediately know that this is going to be the iconic image. And interestingly, I think it broke the record for interactions on Instagram. If not even now, still today, I think it did at the time. And so it sort of plays out these days it plays out in real time as these things become viral, right? It's not just over time.
Yeah. Yeah. That leads us into the kind of deeper conversation, I guess, about Getty and its place in media now, going into the next era of kind of imagery and photography, which you've hinted at a little bit there. But, first of all, just on a purely pragmatic basis, when you come out of the World Cup commercially, what conversations does that take you into with other partners and other media organizations over the next year or so? Is it a shop window, basically? It's I suppose the simplest way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that any of these really, really large mega events, World Cups, Olympic Games, are of course a shop window. They're often the reason that many of us have become interested in the profession from the start. I would only add that while they're shop windows, the sports industry today is such an enormous, successful industry that there's pretty much a World Cup 365 days of the year. And so whether we're covering, domestic leagues, continental leagues, global tournaments like the World Cup, whether we're covering that for media or whether we're covering it for sponsors and licensees to drive engagement for their programs and their readers and their customers, that process is a constantly ongoing process. And I would say something like the World Cup is absolutely a shop window, but in many ways, all that other activity that sits across the football industry also plays the other way around into the World Cup, if I'm making any sense. So the work, for instance, we would do for UEFA and the Champions League, or the work we do with Premier League clubs or Bundesliga clubs or La Liga clubs, a lot of that then feeds back in. So I would call it more of a cycle than rather than the World Cup driving the entire process. That makes sense.
Sure. Let's talk about the place that photography finds itself in. You mentioned that you want Getty to be trusted in a way that is, that this is a real image, basically, which is all. I think that that's been a thing in photography in one respect or other for well over 100 years. But with AI, obviously, it just proliferates to every corner of kind of creativity that you need to understand what the source of something was. What do you see the impact of generative AI being on that approach? Do you see it as a threat? Do you see it as something that kind of slightly more clearly delineates what you guys do? What's your perspective on it?
I think we're living in a very, very important moment for premium photography and the type of photography that Getty Images invests in, because at a time when there's this sort of exponential growth of imagery via AI, generative or modified, we really believe that the value in that investment that we're putting into real content that is trusted is only going to increase at this moment in time. And as I sort of touched on a little earlier, that really sits on the back of making sure that you've invested in a team, who are able to follow professional standards to the highest possible quality, and do so in a way that is sort of proven out on a daily basis. Trust is not something that you take for granted. We really do make sure that is something that is in our absolute line of sight on a daily basis, and it's something we believe we have to earn on a daily basis. But if you're successful in that, and we are successful in that endeavor, then that does very clearly demarcate you from what's happening with AI and increase the value of your content.
Yeah, obviously there's two sides to this, because Getty has a partnership with OpenAI. So there's the new partnership that's been announced with OpenAI, which is around generating images, but it's that thing of you're seeing a thing and you can trust it, and that it's a real image, and then also that, there might be some value to having the highest quality stock of images to be able to train new models on.
So it's very important to clarify, our relationship with OpenAI is not to generate images. Our relationship with OpenAI is to display images. So in the same way that you might be interested to go to Google and ask to see the image from the winning goal of last night's game, with the sort of increased adoption of large language models to be able to retrieve news, there's going to be a demand to be able to retrieve your news via, something like OpenAI or ChatGPT. So the ability to be able to ask to see last night's winning goal and to see the real image carries as much value there as it would on any other platform. So we believe that's important. But again, not generating synthetic content.
The other thing that I wouldn't say is a challenge, but it's a dynamic within photography is obviously, people have had increasingly powerful cameras in their pocket for, where are we now? About just over 15 years. And you also have trends on social media that are very photography led, but it's not the same. It's not news photography. It's something else. It's something I've seen, and actually sports brands and rights holders have kind of leaned into it quite a lot in the last couple of years, is social first photography that's built around older film stock aesthetics, often using that film stock, not kind of filters and things like that. Disposable cameras had a moment a couple of years ago, and I think that's kind of still persisting as well. Is that relevant to what you guys are doing? Is that relevant to what your photographers are trying to do? There is a visual language, as you say, that's going on, and there's a conversation that's happening in that language, but also you're not contracted by your partners to go out there and take images that look like they're from a kind of 1997 point and shoot.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question, because there's kind of two sides to this as well. I think the first thing is that in a world where everybody is a photographer, far from sort of calling the death knell on premium professional photography, a little bit like what's happening right now with AI, it's sort of what we've seen is just an increasing demand for visual content. And so if you continue to be able to satisfy that demand, you're in a great place. It's something, it's all everything that's at the center of what we do. The second piece, which is, I think, very important about your question, is it's more the aesthetic piece, which is that through that proliferation of a social first handheld content, there has become a visual language that looks very, very much like it was captured on a mobile phone. We see less demand from that from media customers, but we absolutely see an increasing demand from that from sponsors, licensees, governing bodies who want to speak directly to their audience in a language they understand. And the language they understand is the social language, the social first language. And so we often do have our sports specialists, soccer specialist photographers, when working for a sponsor or working for a licensee, working to a brief that is looks social first. And what's really interesting about that is when they get to turn their sort of expert creative eye to that, you get some really, really interesting results.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. We're running a little short on time here, but let's look at that question of taste. I mean, what's your kind of? I mean, I don't know how many photographs you still take yourself, but what kind of shots would you like to take if given the chance?
I'm as a complete sports obsessed person, that I'm happy at any sports event in the world if I get the opportunity. But at this point, we often talk about a passion for pictures, Getty Images, and so stepping away from what we do on a day-by-day basis, I'm absolutely happy at taking pictures of wild animals on the Serengeti. To great imagery is great imagery, and I think that's something that sort of is inside all of us.
Yeah. What's I think you've kind of hinted a couple of times at what makes for a great sports image. I think you actually kind of suggested it a little earlier in the conversation. But what's your favorite sports image of all time, or what are some of your favorites, and how do they express those qualities?
There are so many, but my favorite World Cup image, given we're right in the middle of it, I think has to be the image by Steve Powell, who was the founder of All Sport, which is the precursor to Getty Images Sport, of Diego Maradona in the opening game of the 1982 World Cup against Belgium. You might remember it. You only see his back. He's on his own in the frame, sort of facing 5 or 6 Belgian defenders like a matador. I think the image many times has been called, the matador, and that is still one of the great football images. I think every tournament that we've gone into since 1982, photographers have tried in some way to recreate that image for whoever the star of the tournament was, and we'll be doing that this time with that's one. And I'm folks like Messi.
Trying not to be pedantic here, because I think it actually captures something that's really important about Maradona and his role in that era and who he was to Argentina. The reason I think people have struggled to recreate it is because I think someone broke down the footage of the game, and it's a wall. It's a defensive wall at free kick, and someone's played the ball to Maradona. But it says something about how a still image communicates something in a way that, it's how, not to get too metaphysical about it, it's true even though it's not quite what you think you're seeing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And unlike video where you're watching 24 frames in sequence across a number of seconds, you're picking a frame from within a second and are able to tell a story like that. And you're absolutely right. The Belgian wall is breaking and Maradona is receiving the ball, and it creates this feeling of the sort of the matador and the bulls.
Yeah. Something we haven't had enough time really to talk about is the archive, which ties nicely into that. What are some of the ways that we're going to see that used in the future, do you think, this extraordinary store of images that you have from previous events?
We see it as increasingly we see the archive as both a place where creators can ideate as well as use content for projects that they already are certain that they're working on. We get an increasing number of people who come to the archive just to sort of research and ideate and come up with ideas for what the next great project might be. And that's absolutely relevant to sport as well. We're specifically seeing that more and more now around documentary production, where we see a large opportunity to really leverage our archive. So the market around documentary production has sort of had its ups and downs over the last sort of 6 or so years. But we really are committed to sort of unconstraining storytellers in the documentary space to be able to come to the archive, discover content that was either previously hidden or has been forgotten, and that might make the basis of fantastic non-scripted storytelling. In some cases even partner in those productions together, enter the production space as a genuine partner, but versus a licensing partner.
Okay, well, it'd be fascinating to see what stories arise from that. Unfortunately, I'm aware that you have to jump, so we're gonna go on to our
Sure.
the 3 questions that we ask each of our guests. The first is: do you have an origin story of your own, or something that sparked your interest in sport?
I think my origin story is that I grew up in the northwest of the UK, so not too far from Liverpool, and like everybody in that, growing up in the 1970s in that part of the country, you basically kicked the football around in the street, and of course followed one of the enormous football clubs in that part of the world. And so very quickly I became aware that sport was going to be a passion. It was a passion for everybody where I live. I mean, it was just sort of ingrained into you. My passion for sports photography, I think, is born from a very specific moment, and that is an edition of the Sunday Times and the Sunday Times magazine that came through my parents' letterbox for the 1984 Olympic Games. And it was this beautiful supplement of the best of the Olympic Games in Los Angeles in '84. So I would have been 13 years old. And much of that, I think all of it inside the Sunday Times magazine, was this absolutely stunning color, creative photography by the All-Sport team, who later became the Getty Images team. And definitely that was the moment where I remember thinking at 13, that's what I would love to do.
Yeah. Similar thing to what we talked about with this World Cup as well, with that Olympics, was, the West Coast sunshine,
beautiful light,
being such a definitive part of that palette. What's your favorite piece of sports storytelling?
Again, what a question. I'm going to go 2 sides of the fence, editorial and commercial. I would say on the editorial front, I am always drawn to stories that give you an insight behind the curtain. And so I would lean into things like the Senna documentary in Formula One, where, talking a little bit about the archive, where the team behind that were able to delve into hundreds and thousands of hours of unseen content to be able to piece together a story behind a subject that we thought we all knew so well, but still give us something new. So I think that was an extraordinary piece of work. On the commercial side, as a parent, I'm always drawn to the idea of the relationship between parents and athletes. Parents invest so much and support athletes in so many different ways. And so it's not a particularly original answer on the commercial side, but I always lift up the amazing work that Procter & Gamble did around the mums and the athletes at the Olympics. I think that was fantastic, because the relationship between the Olympic parent and the Olympic athlete is so key for that to work. It was just incredibly smart, clever storytelling from a commercial perspective.
Yeah. And finally, what's a sports story you'd like to tell or see somebody else tell?
I'm fascinated by some of the sports or pastimes that happen away from the sort of the commercial juggernauts. I think the relationship between those events and sports and local communities could make fantastic storytelling, especially as I was talking about non-scripted documentary. So if you think about how sumo plays in Japan to community, how maybe the paleo plays to the Italian, there's even I think even a more interesting sport in Italy called calcio storico, which is an ancient version of the game of football played in sort of medieval times. It's still played today in Florence. And so the list goes, Gaelic football, the list goes on. And I think there's that relationship between, I kind of going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about the act of watching somebody or somebody doing something, watching something, and then it becoming part of your identity is really fascinating to me. So I would love to see those stories told around some of the sports that really kind of drive our local and cultural identity.
Okay, well that's a great answer, and hopefully we'll get to see some of those stories told, and we'll get to see some of the defining images, many of which are still to come from this World Cup. But Ken, it's been really enjoyable. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure. Thank you.